Hi, my name is Chloe Brotherton, and I was a Mellon Public Scholar in summer of 2021. My project was called Pronouns, Labels, and Inclusion, LGBTQ Voices. So first, I'd like to give a little bit of background about myself. I am currently a PhD candidate in linguistics at UC Davis. My research focuses on language, gender, and sexuality, specifically looking at the importance of language in feminist and LGBTQ activism. And I also identify as a member of the LGBTQ community, which influences my choice of research topic, both for my dissertation and for this project. So now to get into background about the project itself, I worked this summer with the San Joaquin Pride Center in Stockton, California, to help them develop some materials, printed and digital, dealing with issues of language, gender, and sexuality for a broad community audience. So just to give you some background of why I chose to do this, I grew up in Stockton, California, which is where the center is located. So Stockton is not that far from Davis. It's only about a 50-minute drive to the southeast. And Stockton is really interesting because it's the county seat of San Joaquin County, which is the county directly south of Sacramento County. And it is the 11th biggest city in the state of California with about 400,000 residents. But it is kind of this urban center that is surrounded by agricultural and rural communities that tend to be more politically and culturally conservative. So while Stockton is incredibly diverse in terms of racial, ethnic, gender, sexual identities, the surrounding area is not so much. So as I was in high school, as I was growing up, there really weren't that many local resources for people who were coming out as LGBTQ in our county, at least. The closest local centers were either in the Bay Area or in Sacramento. And I know this because I had several friends who were coming out around that time, and I was trying to find them places that we could go to get information and support, and closest were, 30, 45 minutes away. So actually the San Joaquin Pride Center, which is the LGBTQIA center for the county, was founded towards the end of my high school career, but I was not aware of it. It was not very well publicized at the time. And I actually didn't find out about its existence really until last year when I moved back to Stockton as to quarantine with my family during COVID restrictions. And so as I was thinking about what I wanted to propose for my Mellon Public Scholar project, I thought it would be interesting to try to connect with the LGBT community within my hometown, this community where I was raised, to try to engage with that community now that I'm an adult and a graduate student who does research on the LGBTQ community. So specifically, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I look at the importance of language to LGBTQ and feminist activism. And so for my dissertation project, I'm working with both the LGBTQIA and women's centers on UC Davis's campus. So I have some experience working with resource centers, at least on a college campus. So I decided to propose working with the San Joaquin Pride Center to help them develop materials on issues of language and identity, because when I was looking at the center, when I had moved home, I noticed that their website didn't have very much information regarding identity labels, pronouns, or other materials meant for people who are curious about the community more broadly. And since at the time the center was closed to public physical access, the website was basically all they had. So I decided to reach out and ask if I could help them develop some materials for their website, and then hopefully print materials for when we eventually came back in person, and they agreed and said that they were already planning on updating their existing materials and adding more materials to it, and that I could definitely help with that process. So why is this important? Why are a bunch of brochures or website pages important to this community specifically? So something I've noticed both in my own experience as well as talking to other members of the LGBTQ community and my research, the LGBT community focuses a lot on language as a way to present your identity to the world and to define your identity for yourself. So just a few examples, if we think about the idea of coming out, that's a linguistic event, telling a story about yourself to others. There's a lot of discussion within the community about labels that fit one's identity, changing labels over time, the meaning of different labels, etc. So labels are seen as fairly important to identify yourself and to share your identity with others and to make community with others with similar identities. And then third person gendered pronouns have become a big issue, not just within the LGBT community, but more mainstream, thinking about asking people and sharing how you would like to be referred to in the third person. So he, him, his, she, her, hers, gender neutral, they, them, theirs, or even some newer pronouns like sie, zim, zir, etc. So this is part of what I, I'm studying, what I'm doing my research on, but it can really be intimidating and confusing for people who might be questioning their sexuality, especially youth, or people who have just come out or just now trying to enter the community, as well as their loved ones. So if someone tells you, hey, I'm bisexual, and you want to support them, it can be really intimidating trying to figure out all of the nuances that come with the meaning, the identity, what to ask, what not to ask, etc. And so that's where online resources, print resources, books, resource centers, support groups, etc., can be really helpful. There are a lot of websites for different LGBTQ resource and support groups and organizations, both locally and nationally, that have pages like frequently asked questions pages or glossaries, just to help people understand all of the terminology that's being used. And so there's also, with all of that diversity and resources, a lot of conflicting definitions and usages. One resource might say that a term means one thing, and another resource might completely contradict that. So that in turn can amplify confusion for people who are new to the community. So I wanted to work with the center to make something kind of introductory and be explicit in saying that, different people use these terms in different ways, and this is meant as a starting block, and that then we can point people to other resources to learn more. So over the summer, I started out by spending time in the Pride Center, which thankfully reopened for in-person events and consultation in June, which worked out well because that's when I was really starting my project over the summer. And so I went to a few events, met with staff, hung out in the space, just to familiarize myself with their programs, who worked there, who came in on a regular basis, what was their purpose, etc. And then I researched different resources and support materials, like I said, some of those glossaries and FAQ pages at other LGBTQ organizations and centers to see how they were writing these kinds of materials, since they were facing similar goals and trying to spread this information to a wider audience. And so I was trying to compare also to see how they defined things, how they explained things, what kinds of images and charts did they use to explain complex concepts, etc. I also met with staff and evaluated the center's existing resources because they did have a lot of print resources that talked about identity labels, pronouns, etc. But the staff told me that a lot of it was out of date because in this community, terms change, new terms are added, previous definitions change, old terms go out of style or are seen as not as inclusive and that there might be a better term. So we went through and looked at what could be saved, what could be added to, and what needed to be taken out. So specifically, I met and collaborated mostly with Jonathan Lopez, who is the center's youth outreach director and really focuses on education and outreach, mainly with youth, but also with the broader community. And so he was my main point person, although I also met with other staff members, including the executive director. And so the majority of my time then was spent drafting and revising pamphlets and booklets with input from Jonathan and my faculty advisor, Dr. Eric Russell. I just want to give you an example of a draft of one of these pamphlets that I was working on. So this is the backside of our pamphlet for bisexuality. So as you can see here, we've got, it's in the colors of the bisexual flag, which was the way that we decided to organize the brochures or pamphlets based on identity labels, since most LGBTQ identities are associated with a flag with specific colors. We decided to color code them to make it easier for people to remember and easier to organize when these actually go in the center on like a paper organizer. So here you can see we've got a basic definition of bisexuality, and then a couple of other definitions, and then information about the Pride Center, and then other resources that people can go to for national organizations and other local projects, such as this one in the Bay Area here, so that they can get more information besides just this short pamphlet. So we also have done pamphlets on asexuality, on non-binary identity, on transgender identity, on healthy relationships, on lesbian identity, etc. So I think in all, we're going to have about 10 once they're all finalized. So I'm not completely done with this project, and my relationship and partnership with the Pride Center continues. So right now, we are working to finalize the brochures and pamphlets, language and formatting, gonna get it signed off by the executive director and then get them printed. After we finalize and print everything in English, I will be working with the executive director, who's a native Spanish speaker, to translate all of our materials into Spanish, since that's the second most spoken language in the county. And then we're going to be working to find translators in other community languages that I don't have familiarity with, like Tagalog, Khmer, Punjabi, and Chinese. And then also right now the center is redesigning their website. So I'm hoping to work with their website designer and other staff to get the material that is currently in pamphlet form into a digitally accessible form so that people can search for it and find it on their website without having to come into the center itself necessarily. So just some general reflections on this whole experience. I really learned that scholarship doesn't necessarily have to have a firm definition, even though it is presented as having a firm definition. Oftentimes within graduate school, we're told that certain things count as scholarship and count as important for our career, both as a student and in the future, like writing papers, getting them published, doing conference presentation, etc. And things like community activism doesn't really count. That you can do that in your free time. But this program, both through working on my project as well as talking to other fellows, and Stephanie especially, helped me realize that no, scholarship does not have to be defined in one particular way. And scholarship can be helpful and engaged beyond just trying to further my own career. And so kind of going after off of that, I've really come to believe that community engaged work, community engaged scholarship should be recognized as valid and vital to the mission of the university and academy. Um, you know, Universities tend to say that they want to make a difference in some way, and yet the academy as a whole discourages this kind of research, this type of scholarship. And so I think there needs to be more concerted efforts to change that system, especially for graduate students. Recently, I was on a panel along with some other former Mellon public scholars talking about this very issue, about how can we get community engaged scholarship more firmly entrenched within graduate education. And I think that's really, really important. And programs like this are a really good start. And then finally, kind of more of a technical, practical issue that I ran into while trying to draft these brochures and materials. I realized as graduate students, we're really trained to write to and speak to other scholars, to write incredibly complex, nuanced arguments and engage with theory and new methodologies, etc., which is awesome. But then trying to write for a broad public community audience takes really different skills. And that's not emphasized nearly enough. I know that at least at UC Davis, there are a few workshops put on by like graduate studies on how to present your research to a wider audience. But I think that we would be better served as graduate students if that were more centrally integrated into graduate curriculum. Because I definitely struggled trying to figure out how can I break down this concept in a way that is understandable to the people who are going to be reading this. And I know that I'm definitely not the only one when trying to communicate the importance of my research or a project to people who are outside of the university. So to conclude, I would encourage everyone to please check out the San Joaquin Pride Center. As I said, their website is currently under maintenance, but you can contact them and find out more information on Facebook, or by calling them at this number, or by going and checking out the center itself if you are local to Stockton. Thank you very much. If you have questions, please send me an email. You can find my contact information at the Mellon Public Scholars website. Thank you very much.